Chapter 19. Gnosticism. Basilides, Valentinus, Ophites, Sethites, Cainites, Marcion. With certain fundamental Gnostic ideas we are already familiar, but it is desirable now to give a brief account of one or two of the most celebrated Gnostic systems which were formed in the course of the 2nd century. One of the most celebrated Gnostics was Basilides, who taught in Alexandria about 125 AD, having, according to Epiphanius, come to that city from Smyrna. He professes to accept as the source of his system a secret tradition, which had proceeded from Ham, the son of Noah, and had been preserved by Oriental wise men, Barkabus, Barkopf, and Barkor, and, from the time of Christ, by the Apostle Matthew and others. The principles were unfolded in 24 books, to which he gave the pretentious name of a gospel. At the head of his system, Basilides places a being incomprehensible, and therefore indistinguishable by name, the non-existing God, not existing, that is, in time. This nameless God has, not through emanation, but through his will, through his word, called the world into existence out of nothing. But this original creation is not the world in full development, but only in germ, also called
Μορφίατο,
which corresponds to the word chaos. Out of the nameless God, life is developed in the following order,
Nous,
called the firstborn and the spirit, the
Λόγος,
divine understanding, then
Φρόνησης,
thinking power, then in further emanation,
Σοφία,
wisdom,
Δύναμης,
force,
Δικαιοσύνη,
righteousness,
Ειρήνη.
peace. These 7 powers, which are not conceived of as mere abstractions, but as living personalities, form, with the original being from whom they are derived, the first heavenly or sacred
Γδόας,
octave. Out of this is formed a second and similar heaven, and a third and a fourth, and so on, to the number 365. These 365 heavens, or spirit realms, where we have a gradation from more to less perfect, are comprehended in the mystic name Abraxas,
Βράξας,
which equals 365. By the last emanation, the pleroma, the 365, approached the bounds of chaos. The chaotic powers stormed against it and drew to themselves luminous particles, whereupon the angels of the lowest order, particularly the first of them,
Αρχών,
created the imperfect world of sense and the race of mankind. The Archon, a limited being who holds a low place in the pleroma, is the God of the Jews, the God of the Old Testament. He does not, however, act freely and independently, but serves as a mere instrument of the purpose of the Supreme God, which is to bring the process of development to its goal. For the completion of this process, there was needed a special revelation, far transcending the wisdom and power of the Archon. Nay, it was needful to deliver mankind from the sway of the imperfect being. Accordingly, the highest of the spirits had emanated from God, the
Nous,
united himself with a man, and that man was Jesus, the union taking place at the baptism in the Jordan. Up to the solemn act of consecration at the Jordan, Jesus did not differ from other men, but now the Spirit of God came upon him, and he was constituted and became the Son of God at the very time the voice was heard from heaven, saying, "This is my beloved Son, in whom I am well pleased." The followers of Basilides, therefore, held the baptism to be peculiarly worthy of commemoration, and it is worth noticing that the earliest mention of the festival of Epiphany is an allusion by Clement of Alexandria to the annual celebration of Christ's baptism by the Basilidians. Like Cainites, Basilides appears to have held that the
Nous,
left Jesus at the time of the Passion, and that what Jesus suffered, he suffered not as the Redeemer, but simply as a man, and, like other men, not without sin, though in him sin was reduced to a minimum. The idea of substitutionary suffering does not enter into the system. Every man must personally make expiation, and special blessedness belongs to the martyr who has the opportunity of making atonement by the voluntary surrender of his life. According to some representations, Basilides taught not only generally that all the passions to which man is subject spring from the matter in which his spirit is immersed, but that the particular objects, animate and inanimate, with which he is surrounded tend to produce effects corresponding with their own nature. The wolf awakens in him cruelty, and the stone obduracy. Redemption, then, is obtained as we rise above material influences and live out the ideal and spiritual world which has been revealed to us. It seems agreed that the moral principles and life of Basilides were pure. "Let us love all, for all is kin to all," he was wont to say, "but let us hate nothing and desire nothing." His followers, however, are accused of abandoning themselves to licentiousness and of devising endless sophisms as a cloak for the most degrading vices. Valentinus, likewise, taught in Egypt. He was probably born there. At all events, he was early brought under the influence of Philo's philosophy. He also studied the Pythagorean and Platonic philosophies, and alleges that he was indebted for instruction to one Theudas, a scholar of Paul's. He came to Rome about 140 AD and spread his doctrines there when Hyginus was bishop. Being excommunicated as a heretic, he went to Cyprus and died there about 160 AD. In the aeon world of Valentinus, the world of eternities, the everlasting ideas which underlie this finite world of sense as its presupposition, we have a succession of syzygies, that is, of aeon pairs, which, according to the usual emanation doctrine, descend to the more imperfect, according to the distance from the original being and ground of all being, which he calls the bithos, which indicates not only incomprehensibility, but immense fullness of life, and also
Propator.
and
Proarchi.
though the bithos is sometimes represented as sexless, yet there is a syzygy even here at the very fountain. He is conceived of as one, and yet as two. He has a partner,
Σιγή.
silence, who is also called
Χάρις.
grace, and
Νία.
thought. We are to conceive of him as absolute, as hidden in everlasting silence and secrecy, but at the same time as inherently blessed, if not the fountain of blessedness. And still further, we are to conceive, it may be, of
Νία.
as self-conscious and comprehensible only to his own thought. But from the bithos and sige come forth
Νους.
reason, called also
Μονογενής.
only begotten, and with him
Λύθια.
truth. Out of this celestial syzygy comes the
Λόγος.
and the
Ζωή.
word and the life. And out of this aeon pair comes the ideal man, who is united with the ideal church. These constituted the first,
Γδόας.
the Holy Eight. Then we have 5 aeon pairs from the Logos and the Zoe, and 6 aeon pairs from the
Ανθρωπός.
and the
Κλησία.
a holy
Δεκάς.
10 and a holy
Δωδεκάς.
12, which together with the
Γδόας.
give us the number 30 and constituted the fullness of the divine life.
Πλήρωμα.
The aeons have now a longing desire to unite themselves with the absolute and invisible, from whom they proceed, and to live in the contemplation of him, as
Νους.
alone of their number could do. In the youngest of the female aeons,
Σοφία.
this desire becomes a passion, and she enters into an alliance with the Supreme, but the offspring, the earthly wisdom, is an unripe, pitiful being, who in her turn has a son, the Demiurgus, the creator of a world which, so created, must necessarily be full of imperfection and misery. To restore the harmony of the universe, disturbed by that unnatural passion and its fruit, we have a new emanation from the Nous and the Aletheia, Christ, who is united with the Holy Spirit. Of this heavenly marriage Jesus is born. But the aeons had now been united in blessed communion, and made like in knowledge, and they are represented as having brought together all that they had of the beautiful and good, the entire pleroma concurring in the last emanation to the glory of the eternal bithos. Christ and Jesus, then, appear in this system as 2 different beings. The latter appeared on earth, and his work was to redeem men, to bring them back to the realm of light, yet he could not himself come into immediate union with matter. The Messias, whom the Demiurge had promised to his favourite people, had a heavenly, ethereal body, and the Jesus Soter,
Σωτήρ.
Redeemer, united himself with him at his baptism. All who become closely connected with him are elevated into pneumatic natures. These are the true Christians, the true Gnostics, the nobles of the race. Beneath them stand the psychical natures, those who are destitute of the highest consecration of the spirit, though they occupy a better position than the purely carnal, the somatic or the hylic. Corresponding with this threefold division, we have the division of religions: paganism, Judaism, Christianity, carnal, psychical, pneumatic. Note: according to another account of Valentinus' system, the Aeon Horos prevented Sophia from approaching Bethos, but out of the unsatisfied longing of Sophia itself arose the Achamoth,
Η κάτω Σοφία.
thus bringing disorder into the Pleroma, till the father of all directed Horos to cast forth the abortion. Hatch points out that, according to Tertullian, regarded the aeons as simply modes of God's existence, abiding within his essence. Influence of Greek ideas and usages upon the Christian Church, page 258. The system of the Ophites, Nasacenes, serpent brethren, was likewise of Egyptian origin and is regarded by many as the most ancient of all. To come at once to what is most characteristic, we have to notice that Jaldabaoth, son of Chaos, into whose genealogy it is unnecessary fully to enter, but who is represented as still partaking of a spark of divine light, is conceived of as not only a limited but a malicious being, whose great aim is to frustrate the intentions of the good God. According to the account given in Irenaeus, he sent forth from the waters a son without a mother, and this son sent forth a third being, and so on till a hebdomad was completed, corresponding with the 7 planets. Jaldabaoth, the chief of the hebdomad, called upon the 6 others to form a creature who should be like himself and them. But into this creature, man, the higher wisdom breathed a divine spirit. Indignant at this, Jaldabaoth, by a fixed dark look into chaos, the subjacent dregs of matter, Irenaeus, begat a son who is called
Phiomorphos.
full of malice and wickedness, and therefore sometimes called the devil. With his help, the enormous Jaldabaoth, who appears also to correspond with the devil, sought to prevent men from attaining the knowledge of the supreme God, and therefore forbade them to eat from the tree of knowledge. But the heavenly wisdom took pity on the newly formed race, and under the form of the serpent, which now appears as her proper symbol and without any bad accessory notion, induced mankind to transgress Jaldabaoth's command. They partook of the forbidden fruit, and their eyes were opened. They became, that is, conscious of their higher divine nature. They took the great step from merely instinctive to moral existence. So also the expulsion from paradise was not a righteous punishment inflicted by the supreme God, but the vindictive act of the enraged Jaldabaoth. But when mankind were driven forth, the heavenly wisdom, which had sent the serpent for their deliverance, ceased not to love and care for them. It was she who filled Jesus at his baptism with the Christ Spirit, which, after he had died on the cross, according to the flesh, quickened him anew, so that he soared up to the heaven, and, without Jaldabaoth's perceiving it, seated himself at the right hand, and gradually supplanted and dethroned him. Such, says Irenaeus, after describing at considerable length this amazing mythology by which the history of redemption is caricatured, such are the opinions which prevail among these persons, by whom, like the Lernaean Hydra, a many-headed beast has been generated from the school of Valentinus. The idea common to all who bore the name Ophites was the struggle continued through all history between Sophia, whose proper symbol was the serpent, and Jaldabaoth, the son of Chaos, as they called the creator or fashioner of the world, who was also the god of the Jews. Some of the Ophites regarded Seth as the father of the pneumatic race, those who, being akin to Sophia, preserved in purity the divine spark of light in the midst of the world's disorder. In the fullness of the times, they further held, Seth had reappeared in the person of Christ. Hence arose the name Sethites or Sethians. On the other hand, the Cainites, who are likewise to be reckoned as a subdivision of the Ophites or Nasacenes, held that those whom the Jewish God had hated and persecuted, above all their patriarch Cain, belonged to the higher, the pneumatic order. Similarly, they believed Judas alone of the 12 to have been in possession of the Gnosis. He betrayed the Redeemer merely because, in virtue of the higher knowledge which distinguished him from his brethren, he foresaw that, by the Redeemer's death on the cross, the kingdom of Jaldabaoth would be overthrown. The Syrian Gnostics, Bardesanes and Saturninus, have much in common with the Ophites. Marcion, son of the bishop of Sinope, and Pontus, who had been excommunicated by his father, according to Epiphanius, for gross immorality, according to others because he was already a heretic, came to Rome about the middle of the 2nd century. Soon after he arrived, he showed by the question he proposed to the Roman clergy, how they explained the passage, "New wine must be put into new bottles," that he regarded the church as still in bondage to Jewish views and the Jewish law. For some time, however, he continued in the best relation with the Roman community, and was honoured at once for his liberality and his asceticism. Becoming acquainted with the Syrian Gnostic Cerdo, who arrived in Rome shortly before him, he adopted from him the distinction between the highest unknown God and the known, the demiurge who had fashioned the world. In this doctrine he found the basis for his assaults against what he considered the Judaizing Christianity of the time. In labouring to propagate his peculiar tenets, he gained many scholars and adherents, but when we remember how even the mild Polycarp called him firstborn of Satan, we are prepared to believe that he encountered the most zealous opposition. He was excommunicated along with his followers, whom he spoke of as the
Συμμισουμένοι.
fellow objects of hate. It is said that toward the end of his life, Marcion became penitent and expressed a desire to be restored to the communion of the church. A somewhat hard condition, however, was imposed, that he should bring back his adherents to the true faith, which, even if he had not died soon, he might have found it difficult to fulfill. He left a work, now lost, bearing the remarkable title Antitheses. The main antithesis, and, if not the deepest, the most prominent in his system, is the antithesis between law and gospel, or, as it may also be put, between the God of the Jews and the good God. Often, however, he is represented as having held 3 or principles, the Hylae being the third, but this being with him entirely passion, it is easy to see how this system should be characterized as dualistic. The supreme God and the demiurge are distinguished as the good God and the just God. It is to be borne in mind, however, that according to Marcion, the demiurge, the God of the Jews, is not only just, but passionate, limited, imperfect, inconsistent with himself. He forbids the making of images and commands the brazen serpent to be set up. He hardens Pharaoh and punishes him. He commands the children of Israel to steal. In the law he requires sacrifices, and in the prophets he forbids them. He promises a Messiah who should deliver and exalt one favoured nation and crush all other nations with a rod of iron. The fulfilment of this messianic promise could not be permitted by the good God. He suddenly descended in his highest manifestation, Christ, to the city of Capernaum. Christ came in a seeming body, not to fulfill the promise, but to destroy the kingdom of the demiurge. He was hated, rejected, and crucified by the Jews at the instigation of their God, who in his rage enveloped the world in darkness and rent the veil of the temple. After his seeming death, Christ descended ad inferos to preach to the souls of the departed and bring redemption to all who would hear and believe, to sinners of Tyre and Sodom and Egypt. From this brief account of his system, you may infer the point that chiefly differentiates him from the other Gnostics. That indeed has led to some doubt whether the name be properly applicable to him. He entirely rejected the allegorical method of interpretation. Another point of difference is that he recognized the high value of faith, of which the Gnostics generally spoke with contempt. Adherents of Marcion, whose system was widely adopted and took a variety of forms, were still found in the 6th century. Without examining any other systems known by particular names, let us make some general observations. 1. As to the moral principles of the Gnostics, it is to be observed generally that they are conditioned by their philosophical view of matter as the seat of evil. Accordingly, their ethics, though some would not use that word since they hold the fundamental conception of ethics is wanting, take the form of a conflict with matter, which must be subdued if the spirit is to devote itself, as it thought, to gnosis. We should naturally expect, then, to find that asceticism was universally practiced among them, but this was by no means the case. On the contrary, we read as frequently of the most entire disdain of all moral law and the most gross licentiousness among them, as of severe mortification and abstinence. With regard to certain relations, differences in life were the natural result of differences in theory. Thus some, like Basilides, held that marriage was permissible, while others, like Valentinus, held that it was not only permissible, but a duty, while a third class regarded it as sinful, appealing to the example of Christ and, as they understood 1 Corinthians 7 verse 7, the precept of Paul. Some Gnostics, if they have been correctly represented, even set up the principle that lust is to be overcome by its free and full gratification. It is only the little stream that can be polluted, not the great ocean which receives all. It would appear that many of the followers of Basilides, who had pronounced the martyrs blessed in having the opportunity of atoning for their sins by a voluntary death, derided them, on the contrary, as men who sacrificed themselves for a phantom, and held that it was lawful to withdraw oneself from persecution by participating not only in meats offered to idols, but in heathen worship, arguing that, as Christ took a seeming body, so the Christian might assume any disguise he chose in order to deceive the carnal multitude and escape their violence and madness. Irenaeus has a passage in which he accounts for the antinomianism of many Gnostics, but of course the question might be raised whether antinomianism necessarily flowed from the doctrine of the gnosis any more than it flows from the doctrine of justification by faith. Animal men are instructed in animal things, such men, namely, as are established by their works and by a mere faith, while they have not perfect knowledge. We of the Church, they say, are these persons. Wherefore also they maintain that good works are necessary to us, for that otherwise it is impossible we should be saved. But as to themselves, they hold that they shall be entirely and undoubtedly saved, not by means of conduct, but because they are spiritual by nature. For just as it is impossible that material substance should partake of salvation, since indeed they maintain that it is incapable of receiving it, so again it is impossible that spiritual substance, by which they mean themselves, should ever come under the power of corruption, whatever the sort of actions in which they indulged. For even as gold, when submerged in filth, loses not on that account its beauty, but retains its own native qualities, the filth having no power to injure the gold, so they affirm that they cannot in any measure suffer hurt or lose their spiritual substance, whatever the material actions in which they may be involved. 2. Their method of dealing with the New Testament revelation. 1. Some of them accepted it as containing divine revelation, but, of course, as containing their own doctrine. That their views were scriptural could be evinced, it is scarcely necessary to say, only by adopting that method of interpretation of which we have already heard as a favourite in so many different quarters, heathen and Jewish as well as Christian. If the rules of historico-grammatical interpretation had any value, it was not for them, but only for physical men. How freely they proceeded will appear from one or two examples. That the expression
Estos anastafniaonon
should be represented as involving their emanation theories is not surprising, and hardly is it more so that they should find the mystery of their syzygies, where such appear in their systems, in the language which the Apostle uses of marriage towards the end of the 5th chapter of Ephesians. More remarkable is the arbitrary way in which numbers are explained in accordance with their speculations. Thus, the last emanation of 12 aeons in the system of Valentinus is indicated by the circumstances that, when Jesus was found in the temple, hearing the doctors and asking them questions, he was 12 years old. The 30 aeons that constituted the pleroma are, in like manner, indicated by the 30 years that Jesus passed before he entered on his public ministry, and still further, if confirmation be needed, by the parable of the labourers in the vineyard, in which the different hours 3, 6, 9, 11, being reckoned together with the first, yield exactly 30. There are great and wonderful and hitherto unspeakable mysteries, says Irenaeus, which it is their special function to develop, and so they proceed when they find anything in the multitude of things contained in the Scriptures which they can adopt and accommodate to their baseless speculations. Their method of interpretation, however, must be taken along with their theory of accommodation and tradition, for they held that Christ and the Apostles, while speaking to the psychical multitude by images, communicated to a little pneumatic company the higher truths which underlay those figures, and which had been transmitted by secret tradition. 2. There were many Gnostics who did not profess to accept New Testament scripture entirely. Many of them rejected large portions of it, and some of them justified themselves by saying that the apostles had frequently misunderstood Christ and consequently failed to exhibit his doctrine correctly. 3. Their relation to the Church. The Gnostics had no thought of separating themselves from the Church and putting themselves in antagonism to it. Acting themselves on the principle of accommodation, they could speak, when they expressed themselves publicly, in accordance with prevailing ideas, letting themselves down to the standpoint of psychical men. What they aimed at was the formation of a theosophical school, as in the old pagan mysteries, which involved no opposition, at least no declared opposition, to the faith of the uninitiated. Their views of worship were very various. Some Gnostics were even dissatisfied with the simplicity of the Catholic services and are said to have introduced images and incense. The followers of Carpocrates set up images of Greek philosophers as well as of Christ,